Hello everyone, this is Colin once again. I'm making this video because I happen to be a Comcast on-demand subscriber. And what that means, for those of you who don't have Comcast or on-demand, is that you go on your TV, and because you have this sort of benefit, there's a lot of movies you can watch for free on demand. And it's really beneficial because you can there's a lot of different varieties of movies, different categories, old and new. And I was going through the drama section a couple nights ago, and I stumbled upon a movie called The Last Temptation of Christ. And since I am a fan of comparative religion, I was curious as to see what this movie was all about. And I watched it because I found out that William Dafoe plays Jesus, and I wanted to see what the circumstances were behind the movie. And just as a warning disclaimer for those of you watching this, if you haven't seen the movie and you're interested in seeing it, there are going to be spoilers, because I intend to actually talk about certain parts of the movie, how it relates to the Gospels in the New Testament and things like this. If you're interested and don't care about the spoilers, then continue watching. I think the movie is rated R for those of you who are interested, because there is some violence and nudity. And so yes, that's just a warning disclaimer. But having said that, the movie from the get-go does not, it actually says straightforward, this is not based on the Gospels, and when you watch the movie, you tend to see that. In fact, it's based off of a book, and after I watched the movie, I actually bought the book, The Last Temptation of Christ, by Nikos Kazantzakis, and that's his name. And I bought the book, and I intend on reading it, but I watched the movie. And it really doesn't, it's not very close to the Gospels. There's no talk of a virgin birth. Really, the movie opens with Jesus, pretty much when he's a little bit before his actual missionary work and his mission begins. And ironically enough, he is a carpenter in this in the beginning, and like he is in the Gospels, but he's a carpenter in the sense that he creates the crosses that the Romans used to execute his own people. So he's not very liked in his town, and but he hears voices, and he doesn't know who the voices are until suddenly he ends up listening to the voices, and he starts thinking that he's the Messiah. And one thing that's interesting about the movie is that it shows him going, I believe, to India. And this is the common belief amongst a number of people. Of course, there really is no literature to back this up entirely, but they say that in the movie he goes to India, and this is, I guess, this is their claim about the missing years of Jesus. Where did he go from age 12 to age 30? And so they portray him going to India and viewing some of the mysticism there. He also runs into Mary Magdalene when he comes back, and again, this is alluding to the idea that Mary Magdalene and him might have been more than just friends, or what have you. In fact, it's interesting to note that this book came out in 1960, so this is way before the Da Vinci Code even alluded to this idea. And so, but they don't get married or anything. It's very much, again, just sort of him trying to deal with perhaps being the Messiah and the Son of God, as opposed to just the whole theme is that his divine mission, as opposed to him settling down with a wife and family. So the rest of the story is pretty much the same. When he's arrested, he's brought before Pilate, and Pilate is really, there is no trial before the Sanhedrin for blasphemy or anything. I mean, Pilate basically just says, "Listen, you're starting an insurrection here, and you're gonna have to be crucified for that." And so they crucify him. But what's very interesting, this is where the movie is famous for, is William Dafoe, who's playing Jesus. He's on the cross, and suddenly, when he yells out, "Why have you forsaken me?" there's a little girl that appears at the foot of the cross, and it claims to be the angel who protects him. And the angel takes him off the cross And this is where the story really deviates from the Gospels, obviously. He takes him off the cross and says, you know what, you're actually not the Messiah. You're not the Son of God. You know, things like this. And then he gets married to Mary Magdalene, but God ends up, you know, killing her, apparently. I guess it was just a test for Jesus. And then Jesus, later on, he does get married. He's a very old man. The movie goes on much farther, and he becomes an old man. He has a pretty large family. And what's very interesting is he runs into Paul, or Saul from Tarsus. And Paul is preaching about Jesus in the sense that you find in the New Testament, that he died for the sins of the world, that he met him on the road to Damascus, and Jesus, obviously in the movie at least, didn't die on the cross. So he actually gets in Paul's face and says, you know, why are you saying this about Jesus when it didn't happen? I didn't die on the cross. And Paul, it's hard to tell whether Paul really believes that this is the Jesus he's preaching about, but he makes a very, very interesting statement. He says, well, my Jesus did die for my sins, and essentially he says to the real Jesus, I don't care if you're Jesus or not, my Jesus is going to get to the hearts and minds of a whole bunch of people. So it's sort of playing on the some people's opinions that Paul started a new trend that was foreign to what the earlier followers of Jesus actually believed in a very unique way, because he's actually talking to Jesus himself. After that, he's on his deathbed, and essentially the disciples come to him, Peter, and actually I guess Judas comes. They're all old men at this point. Judas apparently didn't hang himself. Again, this is contrary to the Gospels. And Judas is just very angry because Jesus actually told Judas to betray him, that he had to do it. It was sort of his mission, which you find that is very similar in the Gospel of Judas itself. Whether the author or the director was aware of that Gospel, I'm not entirely sure, but it plays on this concept that that Judas was just doing his job and that he was not inspired by Satan and things like this. And then after they have this conversation, this is during the destruction of Jerusalem, so Jesus is an old man at this point, and he is on his deathbed. And right before he actually expires, apparently it does this huge flashback, and he's back on the cross. So apparently he did decide to die on to actually die on the cross. And so the movie is very interesting because up to the point when he's on the cross, the movie totally goes down this road of pure fiction. But at the very end, it actually goes back to him being on the cross. He actually is the Messiah, and he actually ends up dying. So what's very interesting is this point when, I guess, people who are Orthodox Christians, they would be tearing their hair out at that point when the movie splits off into pure fiction. But I guess an interesting point is that it totally does a 180 and comes back to him actually dying on the cross for the sins of the world. So the reason why I'm rambling about this movie is because it's probably the most interesting take on a fictional level about the Passion of Jesus. Because either you have movies that are so realistic, there's nothing wrong with that. But then you have movies like The Da Vinci Code, which try and be realistic, and they really try to impose some sort of concept that he did survive the crucifixion, he had a wife and kids, and the bloodline's still going on to this day, and the Catholic Church is covering it up, and etc., etc., etc. So almost like historical fiction. But this movie and this book, The Last Temptation of Christ, goes a totally different direction. They purposely fictionalize a whole portion of it, and then pull a 180 and go, just kidding, he actually did die on the cross. It's just I found it very interesting. So I'm making this video because I really intend on reading books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, which inspired the Da Vinci Code, a number of other books, just to see what sort of validity they might have. Just to read them for myself and just see if there's any shred of evidence anywhere in these books. Like the Jesus Papers, Bloodlines, I'll read The Last Temptation of Christ, book fictional historical novels about Mary Magdalene, just to sort of get a broader scope of what how people try and spin events and turn it into pure fiction, or try and just keep it historical fiction with some quote-unquote facts, and like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, where they actually present it as actual facts and archaeological evidence. So thank you everyone for watching this random video. Peace be with you all.